Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Peach Pundit Podcast. Jason and I, joined by Scott Turner.
Hey Jason, welcome back.
Well, thank you. We are buzzless tonight.
Yeah, we need to get a good buzz on.
Yeah, I need my buzz. I need to get a buzz.
Yeah.
We have several topics to go through tonight. As Scott tweeted out earlier this week, this week's episode of the Peach Pundit Podcast was going to be lit. I don't think the kids still say lit, but
they don't.
We're gonna go with it. Well, actually, you said lit in text message, but on Twitter you actually said barnstormer, which
I
don't know that anybody says that anymore at all.
Listen, there are people in the list. Well, in the last 3 business days, I've heard barnstormer used in context. I've heard mad as a wet sitting hen used in context. I've heard crazy as a run over coon used in context. This is the Georgia legislature. This is how these people talk. I don't make the rules, Jason. Barnstormer is completely appropriate.
Very clearly, you don't make the rules. So our first topic is meant to be, because we got a lot of stuff, since we have so much to talk about today, we have a lot of stuff to go over. So before we jump into this, allow me to set the context of this by showing you what specifically we are talking about.
And if you're on the YouTube, you got this, man. But if you don't, we have to describe it in detail.
Yes. So this, what you see on the screen here, and for those of you listening, I'm so sorry that you cannot see this, but this is Kandiss Taylor's underwear. This is.
When you say it like that, it's so perfect.
No, this is a pair of women's briefs, as described by Kandiss Taylor's on Kandiss Taylor's website, her Shopify. That you can buy for the low cost of $31.33. The hell, they come in large, which this gets me. Large is the first one listed, then extra small, then medium, then extra large, then 2X.
Well, that gets you. What gets me is on the back. You can see there's a peach, and the peach is what really sells it for me. I'm getting a pair of these just to hang on my wall. I have to.
Yes, Scott, we all know you have an obsession with women's underwear.
Well, no, not just any women's. I mean, this is, we are starting the Peach Pundit podcast off talking about Kandiss Taylor's underwear. This woman is stealthily brilliant. Okay. I mean, her marketing with the whole, God made me a fighter and I'm one of you, or whatever, however she says that. The fine tail booty song that her husband wrote for her. The Kandiss Taylor train cannot be stopped, Jason. Now it might not go very far down the tracks, but it can't be stopped.
Let me just read the product description here. Ladies, create your look from head to toe with comfy, cute unmentionables. These lightweight women's briefs provide extra comfort where it's needed the most, with a soft elastic waistband and 2-sided fleece finish for maximum wearability. Show off your created side on your terms. 100% polyester, extra light fabric, regular fit, printed care label inside. And if you buy 2 pairs, you can pay in 4 interest-free installments.
I love how they specify the weight as 2.2 ounces. Like, it's like, is that the dividing line between misdemeanor weed and felony weed?
I am taking this absurdity off of my computer screen. That is
Kandiss Taylor's underwear for sale on a website near you.
Yeah. And in other Georgia political weirdness, this one's just stupid for even Marjorie Taylor Greene. She who must not be named has ranted about Nancy Pelosi's Gazpacho police.
Oh man.
I mean,
the hits just keep on coming.
No, surely she meant Gestapo, but she, according to the Daily Beast, the MAGA congresswoman out of Georgia once again drew widespread mockery and deserved, and this is my own editorialization, deserved mockery when she attempted to draw parallels between the treatment of January 6th defendants and Nazi Germany. But instead, she ended up ranting about a cold tomato soup. For those of you who are wondering what Gazpacho is, once again, MTG is making comparisons to Nazi Germany, the Holocaust.
Never learning her lesson.
Never learning her lesson.
Do not talk about American politics in comparison to Nazis. Let's just stop that nonsense, please.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, we're going to make fun of her because she says gazpacho, and we know that gazpacho is a really horrible type of soup. I mean, if you're going to have your soup, have it hot. Why do the cold thing? I don't get it. But we know she misspoke. The real horrible part about it is she's yet again going into this Nazi nonsense, and I'm tired of it. It's lost its meaning from her. It doesn't mean anything whenever she says it. So I'm over it. I'm over her. I'm just whatever.
Yeah, no, I mean, same. I mean, it's the thing that strikes me is so funny. So, not funny, it's sad, but like back in September, the House passed the Equal Act by a vote of 361 to 66. This bill equalizes the treatment between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. Crack cocaine has been treated more harshly since 1986. Originally 100-to-1 sentencing disparity. Congress lowered that to 18-to-1 in 2010, and this just equalizes it. She voted against it. So here she pretends to care about people who literally stormed the Capitol based on false pretenses. A day after she helped cost Republicans 2 Senate seats in Georgia, and she for some reason has made this part of her shtick to talk about the treatment of these people. Go visit a federal prison. And I mean, go visit a federal prison and like go unannounced into a Bureau of Prisons prison and look at the conditions there. I mean, I don't like people. I don't like it when people go to prison unless they commit violent crimes. What happened January 6th was a violent crime. These January 6th, 2020, or 2021, these were violent crimes, and those people need to be held accountable for it. Or at least I should say there were some violent crimes committed. Not every person committed a violent crime, but regardless, they broke the law.
And as much as I disagree with Nancy Pelosi on virtually every freaking thing, she's not a Nazi. She's not a member of the Gestapo. She doesn't have a Gestapo police force. And at a certain point, we have to regain humanity in politics. We have to recognize that the person that disagrees with me is a human being. I may not like them. I may not even respect them, but I have to respect the fact that they're a person. Yeah. And this consistent effort to dehumanize the political opposition is a real danger. And it is what classically people do when they're involved in propaganda campaigns. And I'm sorry, I'm just not buying it anymore, and I'm going to speak out against it because it's garbage. It's funny that she misspoke that way. I know I've misspoken on this podcast, but I'm just over the whole Nazi comparison garbage.
Here is a tweet that I literally just saw from on Twitter. Gazpacho police would arrest anyone who uses canned tomatoes. And look, to Scott's point, I mean, no one person has the same political views as another person. Everybody has differences of opinion. It may surprise you, people who are watching this podcast, to know that Scott and I disagree quite often, actually.
Oh yeah, they hear it, they love it. They tell me, "Oh, I love it when you guys argue." That's what I hear.
Yeah, I mean, I am pulling for three Georgia Bulldogs who are playing for the LA Rams on Sunday, and a coach who played for the University of Georgia, Thomas Brown, and Scott's pulling for the literal worst state in the union, Ohio.
The underdog, yes, the great American underdog.
Is that the line? Are they the underdogs? I haven't seen it.
I would be surprised if they're not. It's the Bengals, bro.
Fair enough. Taking it back to Georgia. Well, we were just talking about MTG, but that was DC based. Taking it back to Georgia, the governor's race is looking mighty interesting. Particularly the fundraising. Yeah. So Brian Kemp raised nearly $7.5 million. He has $12.7 million on hand. He's also getting some help via the Republican Governors Association through a $500,000 expenditure for a TV ad. Stacey Abrams hauled in almost $9.3 million and has $7.4 million on hand. David Perdue, more like Perdue, raised only 1.1 million and has less than $900,000 on hand. Now that's via the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I couldn't actually look at his disclosure for some, because the State Ethics Commission has royally screwed up how they do this, and it's really hard to find everything now. It used to be so easy, and now it's really hard. That said, Perdue and Perdue's low fundraising has led Brian Kemp to call for him to get out of the race. And you know, whether you look at that as $1.1 million that could have gone to Brian Kemp, or whether you look at that as just some irritating competition who is almost certainly going to get beaten in May, which we will talk about the primary here in a moment. It seems like Perdue's not catching on as much as he had hoped to. And I realize there are polls that show him within striking distance of Kemp, but outside of the margin of error.
Yeah, well, I mean, and his reaction is telling. You know, I think the governor is right, first and foremost, to ask for Perdue to drop out at this time. I mean, and there's going to be times between now and when he actually does, or until this is over, that we continue to see calls for David Perdue to drop out of this race, because he's not doing anything other than placating the ego of Donald Trump, or maybe even his own ego. But he posted Greg Bluestein was with him in Cartersville yesterday at an event where he was talking about his fundraising numbers, David Perdue. And he's quoted by Bluestein as saying, "If they think they're going to bully me out of this race, they don't know how to spell my last name." What does that even mean? Like, I think we know how to spell Perdon't, right? It's Perdue, Perdon't. I don't know. Maybe he was setting up some memes. What does that even mean? This is an election about people versus politicians. Well, sir, you are a politician. Yeah. You're a politician who served 6 years in office. You're not a political outsider. You're on the very inside, man. You're on the very inside. And this nonsense of your campaign is going to somehow take off at this point. Here's the other thing. Like, the vast majority of his, I read somewhere it was 90% of his contributions came from outside the state.
I haven't, because I couldn't see his disclosure. It wouldn't surprise me if that were true. One thing I'll note, though, there was a story about this. I don't remember where I saw it a week or so ago. It may have been the Washington Post, where maybe it was Roll Call, where Trump endorsed candidates are actually having a really hard time raising money. They haven't taken off the way that they thought they would once they got Trump's endorsement, and it doesn't have. And part of me thinks that that warms my heart to some degree, because I don't want, generally speaking, Trump endorsed candidates to win. So I'll say that much. But
I think I'll take that on a case-to-case basis, right? I mean, it's not an automatic disqualifier.
That is why I said generally speaking.
Yeah, I there are some Trump endorsed candidates, like the next one we'll talk about, that I would never vote for, and it looks like he won't even ever show up on my ballot. But when it comes to David Perdue, man, all you're doing here is making it easier for Stacey Abrams to win come November, and that's it. I mean, that's all you're doing. You're throwing shade on a very successful, well-accomplished Republican governor who has earned the right to have the nomination by his time in his office and how he has conducted business. There's nothing more for you to do. There's nothing more for you to prove. You can't raise the money. You're trailing in the polls. You said at one point that you would be Brian Kemp's biggest cheerleader if you lose. And well, that time needs to come earlier as opposed to later. And so do it now. Do it for everybody.
He's got a lot. I mean, he's got a lot. I just don't understand. I don't understand what he's doing. I just really, it's the longer he stays in this race. He's been in the race now for a month. He got Trump's endorsement, hasn't done a lot of good. He's being outraised. He's less than $1 million on hand. Yeah. I mean, this goes hand in hand. And look, Abrams, 9.3 million. That's
scary.
That's scary. And if you're a Republican, I mean, yes, Kemp has about 5 million more, has more than 5 million more than Abrams on hand. But Abrams is going to make that up, not to mention the outside support she's going to get.
Right. And then Kemp has to spend his money defeating Perdue as opposed to her just
That's
walking
right.
into the nomination. So she's going to have a huge head start.
That's right.
After the primaries. And this goes hand in hand with the Vernon Jones news. I don't know if we can go ahead and
go ahead.
Because Vernon Jones announced yesterday, after telling us, I'm never dropping out of this race for governor. I'm never dropping out of this race for governor. Hey, I'm running for Congressional District 10 as a Republican, and I've been endorsed by Donald Trump. And Donald Trump issued a Rumble video today saying that Vernon's a very special man. He's a very special man. and so you have a guy who was polling around 10%. That seemed to be his ceiling. And now those votes are up for grabs. So maybe Kandiss Taylor gets a huge bump, especially now she's selling her underwear. I don't know. I don't know. But with Vernon getting in the race for the congressional district and getting out, he endorsed David Perdue. So clearly the fix was in. These insiders got together in Mar-a-Lago and they decided, Vernon, you're out here, you're in there, you're going to endorse him. And if you endorse him, I'll endorse you. And so these insiders made these backroom deals to try to unseat the most successful governor in Georgia history.
So the thing about Vernon Jones running, and I realize that Georgia has no specific requirement that the candidate live in the district.
Right.
I understand that.
And this is happening in multiple places in Georgia right now.
Right. Recognize that. Vernon Jones lives like 15 miles at minimum, if not more. There's a whole county between DeKalb County where according to his financial report, his financial disclosure from the State Ethics Committee, he has a P.O. box in Decatur that he's registered to. He was a DeKalb County CEO for, he ran for sheriff there. So you have to go get on 20, go eastbound, go through Rockdale, and then go into Newton before you hit a county that hits Georgia 10.
Sure.
And that's the old map. I've seen the new map. I don't remember. I think some of Georgia 10 still hits Newton County, but I don't remember how much.
Well, that's happening all over the place. Marjorie Taylor Greene lived in Fulton County when she ran. And then you have Timmy Barr, who's running in the 10th, who lives about a mile away from the 10th. You have Andrew Clyde, who lives in the 10th and is running in the 14th.
No, I don't. I get that, and I'm not saying. I think this one's particularly egregious.
Yeah,
because we're talking about at minimum a 15-mile difference between these two, and I just think that's a little, because you get DeKalb County around exit 74 on I-20. You don't hit Newton County until like exit 86.
But back to the Trump endorsement for just a second. You were talking about how Trump endorsed candidates are not fundraising well. Yeah. I think you're going to be able to add Vernon Jones to that list. And here's the other thing too. The more the former President Trump does these types of things, where he is engaging with people and he's trying to sell us some snake oil salesman like stuff, then what will happen is his ability to draw people is going to continue to slip. It's not a immediate downward slide. It is a gentle slide. It's moving very slowly down, but it's moving downwards, his influence level. And I think the person that's probably most heartbroken, frankly, today over the Vernon Jones endorsement by President Trump is Mike Collins. Right.
So Mike Collins, who the son of former Congressman Matt Collins, has rolled out a website, realvernonjones.com. If you're watching this on YouTube or Twitch, you see this right now. You see this website, The Real Vernon Jones, a radical lifelong Democrat. It's got a YouTube video with, I'm assuming, various clips of him. It goes into some personal allegations against Jones. Made by some women. His voting record listed here. mentions that he supported Barack Obama for president.
He did.
Donated money to donated thousands to Democrats. Vetoed pay raises for police in DeKalb County. Served as a Democrat in the Georgia legislature for more than 12 years. 38% voting record with Faith and Freedom Coalition, and he is pro-choice. That's actually a specific thing here. So, this is these are the attacks that Vernon Jones is going to see over the course of the next couple months as he tries to continue sort of this re-imaging of himself as this conservative Republican who's all MAGA. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
That website paid for by Mike Collins for Congress. Now, Mike Collins and I have had exactly one interaction, and it happened via Twitter when Mike Collins said that the greatest president in American history was Donald Trump. And I involuntarily typed, "You misspelled Ronald Reagan." And he said, "No, I really mean it's Donald Trump." So this is my question for Mike Collins, which is Donald Trump always right? Or can he be wrong sometimes? Because, I mean, that's the choice, Mike. That's the choice for you right now.
You cheeky bastard, Scott Turner.
Can Donald Trump ever be wrong? Or can he be wrong sometimes? Because right now, I know how you must feel. I know how you must feel. You must have woken up one day and realized Donald Trump's not as much as my fan as I am of him. And that hurts. I know what it's like to be in a relationship, haven't been in one of these in a long time, where I loved the other person more than they loved me. And that can be painful. I would recommend that you seek therapy if you're having thoughts of self-harm, and that you make sure that you are in a safe place, because the guy who you worship doesn't think very highly of you. So much so that he just tossed you to the side. "You mean nothing to me," he said. "My man is Vernon Jones." That's exactly what he said. He says, this is my guy. "I have only one choice," Donald Trump said, "for the 10th congressional district, and that's Vernon Jones."
He tossed you to the side like you were one of his ex-wives.
But
moving right along. So we've spent the last several minutes talking about two different races, and specifically primary races. It's getting kind of interesting because there's a lawsuit that's been filed against Georgia's new maps. And it's quite possible, as it's currently scheduled, the primary election is supposed to take place in May, but it's possible it could take place in June or July if a federal judge decides to delay the primary, assuming that he views the maps as illegally weakening the representation of Black voters. That is according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So that could make for an interesting time. We've seen voting rights challenges, or not voting rights challenges, but map challenges have to some degree gone against Republicans. They were successful yesterday at the Supreme Court. I think it was yesterday at the Supreme Court when a federal judge, the Supreme Court issued a stay on a lower court decision, and that stay basically upheld, for now, Alabama's new congressional maps. So it could be interesting to see how this plays out if the judge decides that Georgia's maps are indeed illegal.
Well, I don't think that they would be ruled illegal. There's always going to be a lawsuit in Georgia, always. Once the Department of Justice indicated that we no longer have to have pre-clearance for our maps, that set off what will always be every 10 years lawsuits, so that there is some sort of review of the maps that are created, no matter which party is in power. That being said, the maps themselves, they could have drawn 2 additional Republican districts in the House and another Republican district in the Senate, and they didn't. So I think the plaintiffs will have a really hard time proving their case, especially in light of the fact that when they looked at Alabama's maps, the Supreme Court said, "Yeah, no, you can't do that." Whatever happens here, I hope it's done quickly, because having this dragged out, not having a decision until June or July would mean basically an August primary. And that is not cool. Especially with with my party's gubernatorial race. Dragging that out's not going to help anybody, and not giving us enough time to coalesce and get everybody back together and unite heading into November. The judge in this case, I guess, is Judge Jones, and somebody reached out to me and said Jones is an absolute lefty. So there is probably some bias already built into that, and that might be speculation on my part. It could be speculation. I don't know the man, but his reputation is that he's a leftist judge. This is not cool. It needs to be dealt with quickly. If he's planning on, and he's quoted as saying, I could reset the entire calendar. Well, you know what? You're not the legislative branch, sir. It's not up to you to set the calendar. It's up to the legislature. It's up to the legislature to set the maps. And if you feel like it's in violation of federal law, you have an obligation, a patriotic duty, frankly, to get that done quickly, because our process can't survive these really super long contests. It shouldn't have to. We should be able to end them and then get on with business. And that's my biggest concern in this. I don't think the maps are illegal. A judge may look differently, but the Supreme Court's already indicating, hey, look, let the states do their thing. And this guy's coming along kind of last minute saying, I'm going to stretch this out. That's not right.
Yeah. So just for point of reference, Judge Steve Jones was appointed to the federal bench in 2010. He was confirmed by the Senate in February of 2011 by a vote of 90-0. So 2010,
back when confirmation votes like that happened.
Yeah, he obviously appointed by President Barack Obama. But for Raffensperger and others in the legislature, assuming he does do this, and Scott, you're absolutely right about the way he views this, the judge views this, the case would almost undoubtedly be appealed, and it would go before the 11th Circuit. And at the 11th Circuit, eventually it could wind up in the Supreme Court. Whether it winds up in some sort of expedited way before the Supreme Court, I don't know, but we may very well be looking at a similar situation to what just happened in Alabama. The court may eventually hear it, but at some point, by the time that happens, it's possible that it'll be too late, and to push back the primary is just untenable at that point in time. So, it's I would say if you're watching these primary races as an observer, or if you're a candidate, don't fret. You might not have another month or two of this after all, because it may be settled because of a stay or something like that.
It needs to be settled soon.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. No. So let's see. So you'll have to pardon my ignorance on this. I had to Google this because Scott didn't send me a link in when I was getting ready. I looked up. Look, for those of you who were watching or new to the podcast, maybe this is your first time, maybe it's your 50th time, because I think we're getting close to number 50. We decide the agenda like the day of.
Yeah.
And this week there was a little bit more chatter between Scott, Buzz, and myself. But Scott sent a proposed agenda. By the way, I've added 2 things to the agenda that I didn't tell you about.
Thanks for telling me about it. Jeez.
Well,
editor.
That's what you get for sending me an agenda 15 minutes before we start.
I posted the agenda yesterday on Twitter.
I don't read your I unfollowed you, dude. Anyway, so Scott tells me about this divisive concepts bill that cleared the House Education Subcommittee. Me not having any idea what the hell he was talking about, literally Googled it about 2 minutes ago. And what that means, what that means is big debate at that Georgia House. What that means is the House Education Subcommittee has paved the way for consideration of HB 1084. This would ban the teaching of divisive concepts in Georgia schools. This includes something like critical race theory, which
it doesn't mention critical race theory by name.
No, but it's come on.
But yeah, but if you look at the definition of what a divisive concept is, it's hard to argue with these are not the things that we want to indoctrinate our children with. The problem with these efforts is that, and I've said this on this podcast before, but for those who may not have heard it, I learned about communism without becoming a communist, right? And so we want to make sure that we can teach about the evils of slavery without advocating for slavery. Slavery might be considered a divisive topic, but in the definitions in the bill, it's things like that one race is superior to the other. That's an example of one of the things specifically listed. And so it's hard to make an argument that these are not things. And one version of the bill, and I don't know if this is the one that passed or not, it mentioned that the teachings of Martin Luther King and the civil rights era should be highlighted, and the importance of value of the individual human being should be highlighted. So these are things that I think the author of the bill is Will Wade. He's been a guest on he's trying to accomplish. The problem with it is it's so incredibly difficult to legislate this idea that you can't teach about something. And that's really where I think the debate and the controversy really resides, is how do you teach these things without indoctrinating children into believing that they should feel bad for being white because there's systemic racism in the system that has favored them for generations, and that's something he wants to get away from. And I think most parents would probably say in Georgia, this isn't something I want my kids to be taught in school. This is something that we should deal with at home, or if it is taught, it should be taught about and not of.
No, I wish we had, and looking, I pulled up the bill. I don't know which version of the bill this is, the definitions that are mentioned here. I guess the definitions of what divisive concept. I don't disagree with any of it. It's just, I wish we had the way this is framed is we don't want to teach kids about racism. And I wish Republicans, and to a greater degree conservatives, had a better way of going about addressing these issues and some of the problems that we face. Because it's like, would you say, as someone who works in criminal justice, I would say that Black neighborhoods are over policed. I would say the reason that we have such disparities in sentencing, despite the fact, like look at drug crimes, there is hardly any difference between usage of drugs between various ethnicities and races, but Blacks and Mexicans, Blacks and Hispanics, tend to go to jail at higher rates than whites. Look at the crack cocaine sentencing disparity, which we talked about earlier. 70% of the users of crack cocaine are white. 78.6% of people who are incarcerated for crack cocaine trafficking are Black. You want to tell me that there's not something wrong with that?
No, I do, but I don't. I would say there's disproportionate, and the math speaks for itself. And I'd be a fool for trying to argue that that's not the reality. It clearly is. But I think what ends up happening with the way things get taught, and one of the examples it was a classroom example from Alabama, because the teacher clearly was not qualified to teach about the Holocaust. And the way that she decided she wanted to teach it was to make half the class Nazis and half the class Jews, and then make them yell things at each other. When we look at things like that happening around the country, I think that's what they're trying to prevent happening here in Georgia. Again, it's a difficult needle to thread. It's a tiny needle and with a really big fat piece of thread. So it's hard to do this legislatively. So I appreciate the effort, but I don't know if it's actually going to hit the mark or not. And that's me being honest. I don't want my child to be indoctrinated to believe that they should have some sort of white guilt because of critical race theory. I do want my children to learn about critical race theory as a theory and not necessarily adopt it as one of their founding principles or or a part of their living philosophy. I think there is a way to do that. Now we're homeschooled, so I get to control how that's done, and I get to temper the lessons with both my own opinion and fact and things that are real world examples.
It's just, I mean, at least with some tenets of, I mean, I'm not, and again, I read the bill, and in the bill, I mean, I don't disagree with any of the core concepts of what the bill says. But this is like, it's like the evolution versus creationism, should it be taught in public schools debate. Evolution's based in scientific fact. There's hardly anything in creationism that's based in scientific fact. But conservatives insist that it be taught. Especially particularly religious conservatives insist that it be taught. There are some elements of our criminal justice system and other parts of society where there is very obvious racially disparate outcomes, but we want to avoid those topics.
I don't think he wants to avoid them.
I'm not saying State Representative Will Wade wants to avoid those topics.
No, I don't think the bill is trying to avoid them. And you made a comment a minute ago that we're trying to avoid talking about racism. I don't think that's the case at all. I think he's trying to overcome racism. I think that's his goal. I just don't know that you can do that legislatively. I think he's trying to overcome those things and find a more unifying message as opposed to a divisive message. And there are those in our current society. I mean, if you watched and I watched a great deal of the hearing because I was there today. And there is a great deal, that they believe that divisiveness is the truth, and it doesn't have to be. We can move beyond that. There have been times in our history as a nation we have been divided, and one of those times is now. But we don't have to remain that way. And I think that's what Will Wade's trying to do. I think he's trying to find a way for us to be more unified, and that happens in the education system, frankly.
Well, get some popcorn out, folks, because we can all live through Scott's experience last week. State Representative Eric Allen posted a misleading tweet last week attacking State Representative Ed Setzler. Allen was hosting a press conference at State Capitol on Cobb County in I think it was their commission maps, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
And Ed Setzler showed up and he spoke. And it was framed as Greg Bluestein from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution / MSNBC framed it as that Setzler crashed the press conference, but it seemed that Allen actually invited Setzler to speak.
It was worse than crashed. He said that Setzler hijacked. Bluestein said that Setzler hijacked the press conference. And let me set the scene. This was on the south steps in the atrium near the rotunda on the third floor of the Capitol. And Eric Allen and the Cobb delegation are there on the steps. They're giving the media every bit of fire and brimstone they can. And they're shouting names of their Republican colleagues in the Cobb delegation. One of those names was Ed Setzler. Setzler was not planning on being there. Setzler hears his name. Setzler sees that there's a press conference going on. Setzler decides, well, I'm going to go over there and see what's happening. He stands off to the side. A reporter says, hey, there's Representative Setzler right there, Representative Allen. Why don't you let him see if he has anything to say about what you're saying? Eric Allen looks over at Ed and he says, come on, come this way. Ed is loquacious. You can't ask him what time it is without him explaining how the watch works. It takes him 15 minutes to tell you what time it is. And by then he's wrong because it's 15 minutes later. Ed starts to talk. Now he's on the microphone for between 2 and 3 minutes before Eric Allen body checks him out of the way and then makes some pretty smart aleck comments. The problem is that the only thing that Eric Allen tweeted was the video of the shimmy body checking Representative Setzler out of the way. Well, a whole bunch of people noticed that were there that Eric Allen was misrepresenting the event. One of those people that called him out was Representative Wes Cantrell, who said, hey, didn't you offer him the microphone? And he responded, you weren't there. And somebody else came along and said, did you invite him? And Eric Allen, in his tweet, which is still there today and has not been acknowledged as false, says he was not invited. It took me 30 minutes to find 3 people that I knew were there who told me that Eric Allen invited him to the microphone. But Bluestein took Eric Allen's tweet, retweeted it to his thousands of followers, and said that Ed Setzler had hijacked Eric's presser. This is when conservatives get angry about media bias, this is the type of stuff that we're talking about, right? So I, as a blogger for Peach Pundit, I reach out to Bluestein and I'm like, hey, I got eyewitnesses that tell me that he was invited. Oh, well, and I'd like, can you tell me why you chose the word hijacked? And he's, oh, well, this is normal. It's not out of line for me to use hijack when people crash other events. And I was just going off of what Eric said. Well, Claire Sims from Fox 5 had the clean video, clean audio. She puts it on Twitter for everybody to see. Eric Allen going, hey, Ed, come over here, have the microphone. And Eric Allen is busted. And Bluestein has egg on his face. Now, to Greg Bluestein's credit, he picked up the phone that night, and he called Ed Setzler, and he had probably an hour and 45-minute long conversation to say he was sorry, because that's how long it would take to apologize to Ed Setzler. But he did it. And for that, I give him credit. So kudos on the mea culpa. It shouldn't have happened in the first place. Please, 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 next time be more careful, because this type of rhetoric hurts. It hurts your credibility, but it also hurts the reputation of guys like Ed. And Ed's a good guy.
So I'm watching the video right now, and he does. I mean, he's looking over at what presumably Setzler. He has papers in his hand. He motions towards him with the papers in his hand, and he gets out of Setzler's way and lets Setzler come up to the microphone.
He does. He clearly invited him over to speak.
That is not hijacking, nor crashing, nor any other
inflammatory language.
Yeah, that's a little. And look, credit to Bluestein, yes. And I know Greg, Greg, he's a good guy. He made a mistake, but it only furthers the accusations of media bias. So speaking of, well, not bias, but in this case, hypocrisy. We mentioned earlier that Stacey Abrams just brought in almost $9.3 million, and she has $7.4 million on hand. What she doesn't have is common sense.
Or a social media director.
She was apparently attended an elementary school and visited with children, and sat down to take a picture of them. All these kids very clearly wearing masks.
Because they're forced to by their school district.
Because they are forced to. And Stacey Abrams, who was not wearing a mask during said photo opportunity.
Multiple photos in multiple settings.
Correct. And she says that she had taken off the mask because she was reading to the kids and didn't think about putting it on. I don't know if she actually said this, but apparently didn't think about putting it on before taking the picture. Regardless, it is a very bad look for Miss Abrams, and it looks like that blatant hypocrisy. But yeah, I mean, she's apologized. She said she made a mistake. Fine. But can I stop getting dirty looks when I go somewhere and don't wear a mask?
Well, did you hear New York today is lifting their mask mandates? Because the science, quote unquote, has changed. Maybe her going to that school that way was part of the evaluation of the science. But here's the problem with it. It's the media immediately, including Bluestein, by the way. Bluestein wrote an article spinning this on Stacey Abrams' behalf, saying that, oh, the Republicans are being hypocritical for criticizing her for not wearing a mask. And that wasn't what the nature of the criticism was at all. It wasn't that we were criticizing her for not wearing a mask. We were criticizing her because she has vocally and forcefully advocated for mask mandates. And then she goes into a place with a mask mandate and she takes off her mask. That was the nature of the hypocritical criticism. Yeah. It wasn't that we were picking on her for not wearing the mask. It was that she has advocated for the mask mandate and then did this. So again, Bluestein going to the defense of the Democrat and then saying that the Republican hijacked something. And the same freaking weekend, by the way, it's like the media bias never stops. is if you're a Republican, you cannot look at anything the media writes. And I think Greg's a good guy. I'd love to have a beer with him, but good God, I have to read his stuff with a filter. And I don't want to have to do that every single time. But that's how the media decided to portray the Republican reaction. They totally missed the point. And,
No.
and I mean, you cannot let this slide. And I'm glad she apologized, but you cannot attack Republicans for criticizing her on this because she earned the criticism.
No, I would agree. I agree with you. And it's especially in light of the sudden change in attitudes towards masks, and that, like as you mentioned, New York, and apparently at least one House Democrat has endorsed what New York is doing, which that's Sean Patrick Maloney, who is the DCCC chair, not an unnotable name, and I think Fauci, our Lord and Savior Anthony Fauci, has said that we're past the peak of the pandemic, and it's I can't remember exactly the word for word what he said, but it's like it's finally coming to an end. There's light at the end of the tunnel. So I just wish we all
just in time for the midterms, Jason.
Just in time for the midterms. I mean, you gotta start changing the narrative, man. Just wait until that next variant comes in. We're all gonna be wearing masks again.
Yeah, well, I think at this point there's so much natural herd immunity between people who've gotten it or been vaccinated against it that it's going to have a hard time finding a new audience.
Yeah. Speaking of COVID and how we all collectively want to flip it off, and we're kind of all tired of it. A state representative this week. You like my segues are like on point.
Man, you are fire. En fuego. Dare I say en fuego.
My segues are good this week. A state representative, a Republican state representative, has flipped off a camera during the official House photo. Now, I am all for stupidity and crude humor, but there is such a thing as decorum.
Oh yes, House Rule 1.1.
Yeah. There is such a thing as a decorum, and I would say that giving the finger to during an official photo, probably not the best idea.
Well, old Dominic Larikia is who you're talking about. Dominic has not always had the best ideas as a member of the House, and I say that in love. Dominic is in all we're not going to give him a light time on this, even though he's a dear friend of mine. I warned him when it came out. I said, and I have to admit,
you, sir, just became fodder for the podcast.
Yes, that's absolutely. Well, I mean, it wasn't just because in the original article that was posted in the Jolt, the AJC article, it was written about this. Dominic is quoted as saying, "I don't know how you found out." And I found out about it last week. I was down at the Capitol, and Dominic's friends came to me and said, "Hey, did you hear about Dominic's finger in the photo?" And I was like, "No." And they showed it to me, and I went, "Holy cow.
How would you not find out? Rumor, if any of you,
his friends sold him out, man. His friends were telling everybody about it.
My point to this is like, if you've spent any time under the Gold Dome and any lobbying any legislature, or just working in the legislature, or just being there, rumors spread. It is currency.
Yeah.
And how did you expect us not to find out?
I just let somebody else break the story. I wasn't going to have anything to do with it. He's my friend, man. He's my friend. I love this guy. We've gone hunting together. I love this guy. Now, that being said, he has some crude humor in him. And now he is also a very fine Christian family man, but he'll tell you that he's broken. He's telling you that he's imperfect. He'll tell you that he is the reason we all need Jesus, right? So he's not a hypocrite about it, but he's also, if I could get more serious for just a second, right? I mean, we've had some good fun poking at him for doing this. It is a serious violation of House rules and decorum and etiquette to flip them off. But this is the question I have, right? I'm not excusing what he did. Domonique Larikia has been the most effective cheerleader for David Ralston and leadership since he walked into the building. He has consistently carried their water. He has consistently fought for them against anybody who would say anything negative or critical of leadership. He has insulated them a great deal through his actions, his words, his willingness to defend them, to the willingness to look the other way when they weren't doing the right thing. Frankly, he has been a team player. This guy gets to a point, and this is where I hope leadership in the House has some level of reflection and self-evaluation, and they do some soul searching about this. How does that guy who's the ultimate cheerleader, who will send a letter to the entire caucus defending the speaker when the speaker's accused of using or misusing legislative leave, defending the speaker, how does the guy go from that to being so frustrated with the way he's feeling about his role in the House that he goes ahead and flips off the camera? Because he's quoted as saying, I did it in fun, but I'm not going to lie to you. There's some frustration. That frustration is real. And he's not the only one that feels it. And so Dominic Larikia has decided he's not running for re-election. He did that before he gave the photographer the finger. But there are a lot of people who feel that way. I had a member this week tell me, I don't think I'm going to run again because the way this place is now. And it would be a well-respected member, that it would be a loss for the House of Representatives for this person to not run for re-election. They haven't been there terribly long, but they're already looking at this saying, my contribution isn't wanted or needed. And the way they're treating Dominic, I don't want to be treated that way. The way they're treating Barry Fleming, I don't want to be treated that way. The way they're treating other people, I don't want to be treated that way. And so I hope that the reason why this cheerleader, epic guy who's willing to carry your water gets to a point where he flips off the camera in frustration, I hope you look at that and ask yourself why that happened. How did we get to here from there? And I hope that you're better. I hope you do better. I really genuinely hope that you do better than the way you have been treating people. Because if that happens to a guy like that, what happens to the other people who are just trying to go along to get along? The moment they step out of line, they're coming for him.
Yep.
They came for Dominic Larikia and they got him, and it got to a point where he did this. And it sucks. I mean, I think it sucks for him and his family. Clearly, he's embarrassed. He apologized. He owned it in his apology. He admitted that he's a broken human being and that he's in need of grace, and he asked for that grace. So, I mean, there's a funny aspect to it. There's a disrespectful, serious aspect, but there's a far more serious aspect where this is symptomatic of a leadership structure that needs to reevaluate how it leads its people.
On a similarly serious note, talking about the sort of toxicity under the gold dome, which, I mean, look, it wasn't going to take long before the toxicity we see at the federal level in Congress to filter down to state legislatures. And I'm not going to sit here and point fingers at anyone because there's enough blame to go around at all sides. Not limited. It's not limited to Donald Trump. I mean, it's been around for a long time now. There was some toxicity this week in the Georgia Senate when the Georgia Senate considered legislation to place a monument, a statue of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas on the Capitol grounds. The statue, maybe Clarence Thomas was born in, I think, south like coastal Georgia, like just south of Savannah, if I recall correctly, a town called Pinpoint, or at least maybe it's an unincorporated area called Pinpoint. But it passed on a party line vote, with all the Democrats voting against it. Obviously, that's what party line means. But there were some pretty harsh words said during the debate on this legislation. This is Senate Bill 326 for those of you who are interested, including one state senator, Nikki Merritt from Grayson, who called Justice Thomas a hypocrite and a traitor.
Ridiculous.
Which is just out of bounds.
But here's the thing. she's an African-American female. And she said the quiet part out loud, that a black man who has conservative points of view, who respects the originality of the originalist point of view when interpreting the Constitution of the United States, is a hypocrite and a traitor. A traitor to what? A traitor to whom? A traitor to the black people is basically what she was saying. And that he's a hypocrite because he's a black man who's become successful. And it's incredible that in 2022, we're still having this conversation about somebody who's been sitting on the court for 3-4 decades and has done nothing but serve his country at this point. And you're going to call him a traitor to whom, ma'am? Who are you calling him a traitor to? Because he's clearly not a traitor to the American people on the whole. He's been consistent in his rulings. He writes clear opinions that explain why he believes what he does. None of that is traitorous behavior. And we have somebody here who decided to grandstand, but ended up really honestly saying the quiet part out loud, that there is a growing perception that if you are of one race, you are to have one particular political viewpoint, and that's the only acceptable political viewpoint. Otherwise, you're a traitor to your race. And that's a problem. Talk about a divisive concept.
No, for sure. And last thing on this week's list of topics, because we are running long, my friend, and I'm not going to bring up the other thing because I just don't think it's worth talking about. The other thing was the alleged double voting. There was less double voting.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. But this last topic is something that I had a conversation about this morning with some folks. This resolution passed by the RNC to censure Congresswoman Liz Cheney and Congressman Adam Kinzinger. And the reason I wanted to talk about it was this one particular line that somehow made its way into this resolution, which the line talked about what happened. Talked about January 6th being legitimate political discourse. And what I've read so far, I think I read this in The Hill this morning. CNN has a story on it, which is the one I'm looking at. That particular line was not included in early drafts of the resolution, and somehow made its way in before the final draft, and it was voted on with other resolutions that were considered. And for clarification, I'm quoting from the story. One early draft, which denounced the two lawmakers for taking part in the House Select Committee investigation into January 6th attack, described the inquiry as, quote, a Democrat-led persecution of ordinary citizens engaged in nonviolent and legal political discourse. That's an early draft there, and somehow it made into legitimate political discourse. Whether they're talking about what happened on January 6th specifically, or whether they're talking about the subsequent investigation that's taking place in the House of Representatives, I really don't care, because what happened. I mean, I don't want to keep going into January 6th and talking about it all the time. Certainly not as much as we talk about Secretary Raffensperger. But what happened on January 6th was not legitimate political discourse. It was violence. You don't storm the Capitol and hope to stop a constitutionally mandated vote count. And I'm very, very grateful to see what former Vice President Mike Pence said over the weekend, that Donald Trump is wrong about his role in the constitutionally mandated vote count that takes place. At some Republicans history says that they will take back at least the House. We know this from 2002, 2006, 2010 midterms. We know this from the 2016 midterm or 2018 midterms when Democrats retook the House. They cannot win back the House and continue talking about January 6th like nothing happened. especially with Biden and Democrats seemingly shifting on COVID mask mandates and talking about loosening restrictions, especially with a good jobs report last month. Now, one jobs report doesn't make or break a president. Inflation is certainly a concern, but the fact that the unemployment rate went up, not down, tells me the labor force is slowly beginning to recover. More people are looking for work, re-entering the workforce.
I think over 1 million people re-entered the job market, right?
Right. So that's why unemployment went up, despite the fact that we created, a few 100,000 jobs. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. Republicans, with redistricting being a wash for both Republicans and Democrats, Republicans only need a handful of seats to take back control of the House. It is not a certainty. Taking back the Senate is not a certainty. It's going to be a tight race for the Senate. And if Republicans do win, they will have a very narrow majority. This sort of trajectory.
And does Marjorie Taylor Greene even count at that point as being part of the majority?
I mean, she'll count. She'll count in terms of she has an R next to her name. She'll be a member of the caucus or the conference, but she, I mean, it's not just her. Does she vote for McCarthy for speaker? I don't know. And that's I mean, we've talked about this before, and that's the thing. That's the thing you got to think about. Is that it takes a majority 218 to elect a speaker. If Republicans come in with 220 to 225 to let's say under,
she's going to be the most
seats,
powerful person in the building,
and the whole entire House Freedom Caucus will be.
Yeah.
And the Freedom Caucus are I mean, they've gotten closer to McCarthy than they have been, but they're still not buddies, like buddy. And
I would not want to be Andrew McCarthy right now.
I mean, Kevin McCarthy.
Sorry. Or
I wouldn't want to be
the former Hollywood star that was his career's over too.
But I wouldn't want to be either one of them. Or the National Review writer, Andrew.
I'm going to go get some Gazpacho now.
It just seems to me Republicans need to refocus and stop this stupidity, whether it's
with the statement that it was legitimate political discourse.
Yeah.
I mean, so Lane Flynn is a GOP activist in DeKalb County, and his Facebook post, I think, was the most poignant on this. And this is what he said. He said that our legitimate political discourse is the same thing as their mostly peaceful protests. And a pox on both our houses, right? That language is just, I don't have the words to describe, other than to try to point out that the party officials are the most fired up individuals in any party, whether it's the LP, the Democratic Party, or the Republican Party. The people who are the most fired up are the people who are in control of these entities. And they don't necessarily represent the viewpoints of the average person who votes for those parties. And that's the only thing I can say. I think, when you have a political activist on the caliber of a Lane Flynn, who's widely regarded as a very smart guy, who was on Jeopardy, won a ton of money. Also longtime activist in DeKalb County as a conservative Republican. And he's pointing out the hypocrisy of calling that legitimate political discourse at the same time as saying mostly peaceful protests were also a sham. I think it shows that the average rank and file Republican doesn't feel that way. And I hope that gives you some hope, because that's the way I feel. I don't think it was a legitimate political discourse at all.
It doesn't. I mean, it does and it doesn't. Like I appreciate the sentiment. But there's just too much going on inside this. The culture wars and all that other stuff that still depress me. So sure, I guess, but not really. There's just way too much happening that's just frustrating. And I wish what you said earlier in the podcast about taking it down a notch is could not be more true. I wish we desperately need to. And I'm just as guilty as the next person of the disagree or being mean spirited towards people who I have disagreements with.
You? No. No, I don't believe you.
Well, no, I mean, there are people. I mean, look, I've made friends on both sides of the aisle. I mean, I work with progressives.
We all should have friends on both sides of the aisle.
Right. I mean, my job is I work for a bipartisan organization. I have friends on the progressive side. I have friends on the right. I saw some of my friends on the right today who I hadn't seen in some cases in 3 years.
You need to spend more time with them.
No, for sure. But it's. I would encourage anybody who listens to this, who's not, elected official or doesn't work in politics, or if you do work in politics, go make friends with someone who has a completely different political opinion as you, and learn something from them.
Yeah, that's how Dominic Larikia and I became friends.
The biggest mistake we make is we look at people who have differences of opinion from us as our mortal enemies, and that sort of thinking has got to stop. So with that, I will shut up. I will say, we love. Thanks for watching. We hope to have you back next week when we do this again, especially for those of you who are watching on Twitch. You can find the Peach Pundit Podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, because we are not withdrawing from Spotify. In fact, we are going to put more episodes on Spotify,
regardless of what happens with Joe Rogan.
And you can also find us on YouTube. Also visit peachpundit.com, where the posts are beginning to pick up. Because of everything going on, I actually wrote one last week. I don't remember. The days are running together at this point. Yeah. Regardless, Scott, it's good to see your beautiful face. I mean that sarcastically.
Oh.
And folks, have a good one. Happy Valentine's Day, and go Dogs and go Rams.